My millionaire husband left me nothing in his will after 37 years. Then a courier knocked on my door with a box. Graham had arranged before he died, and everything I thought I understood about his final act changed in one afternoon. The attorney said my name the way you say the name of someone you've already dismissed. There is no mention of you, Mrs. Alice. He said it across a mahogany desk in an office that smelled like leather and expensive carpet and the specific cold air of a building where money is discussed but never celebrated. His name was Mr. Sterling. I will not give him the dignity of a first name because he never offered me one, and he had the posture of a man who delivers bad news with the practiced ease of someone who has decided that ease is a form of professionalism. The will is quite clear, he said. I sat in the chair across from him with my hands folded in my lap, the chair with the carved wooden arms that was slightly too small for comfort, the chair that I suspect is deliberately slightly too small for comfort. And I looked at the papers he slid across the desk, and I read them because I am a woman who reads things that are put in front of her, even when she would prefer not to. Company shares, donated to charitable foundations. Savings, distributed among distant relatives and former colleagues, in amounts that ranged from $8,000 to $40,000, to people whose names I recognized from Christmas card lists and annual dinners, and the peripheral furniture of a life lived over 37 years. The house, 7 days to vacate. My name, nowhere, not once, on any page. I had been married to Graham Ellison for 37 years. I had held his hand through 2 recessions and 1 bypass surgery, and the year his first hotel nearly bankrupted us, and the morning his business partner walked away with the Singapore contract, and the night we sat in the kitchen at 2 a.m., talking about whether any of it had been worth it, and deciding together that it had. I had loved him with the particular, practical love of 2 people who have chosen each other so many times over so many years that the choosing has become the same as breathing, and he had left me nothing. There must be an error, I said. Sterling looked at me with the patient expression of a man who has anticipated this response. The will was drafted, reviewed, and signed, he said. It is not an error. I hired an attorney the next morning. His name was David Hart, 12 years of estate law, referred to me by my neighbor whose own husband had died the previous spring. He spent 2 days going through every page of Graham's will and the supporting estate documentation with the thoroughness of a man who wants to be certain before he delivers a verdict. He called me on the 3rd day. I'm sorry, Alice, he said. His voice had the quality of genuine regret, which I appreciated because it was real. It's airtight. He left you nothing. I thanked him. I hung up the phone. I went to the bedroom, and I sat on the floor with my back against the bed, and I pressed Graham's blue Oxford shirt against my face, and I asked the silence the only question I had. Why? The silence didn't answer. I had 7 days. I had a moving box. I had 37 years of a life that had just been legally defined as worth nothing, and I had no answer for any of it. I started packing. Let me tell you about Graham before I tell you about the box, because he matters more than what happened after, and because the man in the will and the man I knew were so different that I need you to hold both versions simultaneously to understand the afternoon that changed everything. Graham Ellison built his first hotel at 31 with borrowed money and extraordinary audacity. Not a grand hotel, a 22-room property near a regional airport in the Midwest, the kind of place that exists to serve a function rather than make a statement. He chose it deliberately. You learn the business in the rooms nobody photographs, he told me once. The luxury comes after you understand the foundation. He understood the foundation. Over 30 years, he built Ellison Hospitality into a collection of 14 properties across 4 states, ranging from that original functional airport hotel, which he kept on principle long after the economics no longer justified it, to 2 boutique properties in cities he loved and believed in. He was not a household name outside the industry, which was by design. He had no patience for the performance of success, only for its practice. He was also, in the way of men who spend decades managing large operations, a person who noticed things and documented them, and rarely disclosed the full scope of what he knew until the moment he decided the disclosure was necessary. I thought I knew him completely. I knew him well. Those are different things, and the distinction matters. The first sign that something was wrong, not with Graham, but around him, came 18 months before his death. He had been quiet about work for years, which wasn't unusual. Graham had always separated his professional concerns from our home life with a discipline I'd admired and occasionally resented. But in the last 2 years, the quiet had a different quality, heavier, more deliberate. He spent evenings in his study with the door mostly closed. Not fully, the way he closed it when he didn't want to be interrupted, but mostly, the way you close something when you want to remain accessible while still being apart. I asked him once in the kitchen on a Sunday morning whether everything was all right with the business. He looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not worry. Graham didn't worry, he planned. This was something else. The expression of a man who is managing a calculation he cannot share yet. Everything is fine, he said. He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. Trust me, he said. Everything is going to be fine. I trusted him. I had trusted him for 37 years. I told myself the quiet was temporary, that whatever he was managing would resolve itself the way his problems always resolved, through patience and documentation, and the specific, unhurried thoroughness of a man who had never once panicked in 30 years of business. He died 7 months later, heart failure, sudden, on a Thursday afternoon, in his study. The door was mostly closed. I found him at 6:14 p.m. when I came to call him for dinner. I was folding sweaters $1,000 on day 5 of the 7. I want to be specific about what packing looks like when you are packing a life. It doesn't look like the movies. It isn't cathartic or clarifying or accompanied by the right music. It looks like standing in front of a shelf of books for 10 minutes because you can't decide whether to keep the ones Graham bought or whether keeping them is a form of holding on that will slow down whatever comes next. It looks like finding, in the back of a closet, a wool sweater you bought together on a trip to Edinburgh in 2004 that still has a price tag on it because you kept meaning to wear it and never did. I was folding the Edinburgh sweater when the doorbell rang. A young man in a brown delivery uniform stood on the porch. He had a clipboard and a square cardboard box, plain brown, sealed with clear tape, roughly the size of a shoebox but deeper. No shipping label, no return address. A small white sticker with my name handwritten in block letters. Alice. Are you Alice? He said. Yes. Your husband arranged for this to be delivered on this exact day. He held out the clipboard. Please sign here. I didn't move for a moment. My husband died 2 weeks ago, I said. I know, ma'am. His voice was not unkind. The instructions were very specific. This date, this address, no earlier, no later. He looked at me steadily. He made the arrangements in advance. I signed. He handed me the box. He walked down the porch steps to his truck and drove away without looking back, with the specific professional discretion of someone who understood that what he was delivering was not just a package. I carried the box to the kitchen. I set it on the counter. I stood looking at it for what was probably 3 minutes, but felt longer. The specific suspension of time that happens when you are about to open something that cannot be unopened. Then I cut the tape. A folded note sat on top, in Graham's handwriting. The handwriting I had been reading for 37 years. The precise, slightly forward-leaning script of a man who had written everything by hand in an age when most people had stopped. Alice, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I know you have questions. I know you're hurt. At the bottom of this box, you'll find what you truly need. Trust me, my love. It's far better than money. Gee. I set the note down on the counter. I reached into the box. Photographs came out first. Graham and me at 29, standing in front of the Travelers Inn near the Indianapolis airport, the first hotel, the functional one, with our arms around each other and the specific, slightly overwhelmed expression of two people who have just done something large and irreversible. I had forgotten how young we looked. I had forgotten the yellow Ford we were still driving that year. More photographs. The partners' dinner in 1997 when the second property opened. The Edinburgh trip. A Christmas morning sometime in the mid-2000s when our nephew was young enough to be excited by wrapping paper. 37 years in a cardboard box, compressed to the thickness of a memory. Then receipts. Old ones. The brittle, thermal printed kind that turn orange and then blank after enough years. Hotel supply invoices. An equipment lease from 1989. A contractor's bill from the renovation of the third property. Paid in 2 installments because cash flow that year had been precarious. I went through them slowly, not because they required slow reading, but because each one was Graham, his handwriting in the margins, his notations, his specific habit of circling numbers he wanted to remember and writing check beside things he'd verified. I was near the bottom when the knock came at the door, not the doorbell. A knock, sharp, deliberate. I looked through the side window. Sterling's silver Mercedes was in the driveway. He pushed past me before I had fully opened the door. He was wearing the same suit he'd worn at the will reading, charcoal, impeccable, and his shoes clicked against the marble entryway with the rhythm of a man who has decided his urgency is more important than your threshold. He looked at the box in my arms, and something moved through his face that I recognized as the thing that happens to a person when they see something they desperately wanted to find before you did. There's been an oversight, he said. His voice had the careful architecture of a man constructing composure over agitation. Graham kept documents here that belonged to the estate. I need to collect them. Nobody mentioned documents, I said. Hand over anything he left behind. Files, letters, packages. His eyes went to the box, including that. This was delivered to me personally. Then it was delivered in error. His jaw was tight. His hands at his sides were not still. A small involuntary movement, the fingers pressing briefly against his thighs and releasing. I had watched enough of Graham's business negotiations over 30 years to know the difference between a lawyer conducting routine estate business and a frightened man performing routine estate business. This was the second thing. Alice, his voice dropped. You're a grieving widow. You're not thinking clearly. Give me the box and go back to your packing. No, I said. I turned and walked toward Graham's study. He moved fast. I moved faster, which surprised both of us. I am 63 years old and had not run in some time, but the body remembers urgency when urgency arrives. I got through the study door and turned the lock before his hand reached the handle. The rattling was immediate and violent. Open this door. The lawyerly composure was entirely gone. What was underneath it was not the cold authority of a professional. It was something rawer and less controlled. Open it right now. You have no idea what you're meddling in. I set the box on Graham's desk and went through it quickly. The photographs, the receipts. I got to the bottom. A flat manila envelope sealed with red wax. Graham's initials pressed into the seal. G.E. Alice. Sterling's voice at the door. Now, quieter. The specific quiet of a man who has calculated that volume is no longer working. Listen to me carefully. You're a grieving woman in a difficult situation. Hand over that envelope and I will ensure you receive a generous settlement from the estate. Refuse, and I will have you removed from this property by sundown. The law is on my side. I looked at the envelope in my hands. Graham's initials in red wax. Trust me, my love. I broke the seal. The note inside side was 3 sentences. Forgive me. I left you nothing on paper because I needed you separated from what is coming. Go to my desk. 3rd drawer on the left. Find the hidden panel. The truth is underneath. I loved you every day of my life. I folded the note. I put it in my cardigan pocket. I knelt beside the desk. 3rd drawer on the left. I opened it. Pens, a backup phone charger, a small flashlight, the ordinary accumulation of a desk drawer. I felt along the bottom until my fingers found a ridge that didn't belong, a slight gap at the back edge. I pressed down and forward. The false bottom released. There were 4 items in the hidden panel. 2 ledgers, the old-fashioned kind with green covers, filled with Graham's handwriting, columns of numbers, dates going back 9 years, annotations in red pen beside certain entries, a manila folder containing bank records, photocopied, stamped with dates, several pages highlighted in yellow with Graham's handwriting in the margins. The words shell account appeared repeatedly. So did a specific sequence of transactions that moved in patterns a person unfamiliar with financial fraud might miss, and that a person who had spent 30 years building a hospitality company would recognize immediately. A letter on official letterhead from the Office of the Inspector General, Federal Bureau of Investigation, dated 4 months before Graham's death, confirming that a financial crimes investigation was underway into fiduciary misconduct at Ellison Hospitality's legal representation, specifically allegations of fund misappropriation, fabricated expenses, and unauthorized transfer of client assets to shell entities, and a deed. Clean white paper, county recorded, dated 13 months before Graham's death. A lakeside cottage in northern Wisconsin. 2 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, a private dock, 1,400 square feet on 1.3 acres. Purchased outright, no mortgage. In my name. Solely, completely. Recorded 13 months ago, while Graham was still alive, before the will was drafted, before the estate proceedings began, before any of it, in my name, with no connection to Ellison Hospitality, no connection to the estate, no connection to anything Sterling was administering. I read the deed twice. I read the FBI letter twice. I sat back on my heels on Graham's study floor with the ledgers in my lap and the deed in my hand, and I understood with the specific, complete clarity of a puzzle assembling itself from pieces I hadn't known were pieces, what Graham had done. Sterling had been stealing from him for years. He had documented it. He had reported it. He had cooperated with a federal investigation that was, as of 4 months before his death, actively underway. And he had understood, because he was Graham, who planned and documented and never panicked, that when he died, anyone connected to his estate would be entangled in the investigation for years, that the assets in his will would be frozen, contested, dragged through federal proceedings that could last a decade. So he had cut me free. He hadn't left me nothing. He had left me everything Sterling couldn't touch. The cottage was mine before he died, recorded and legal, and entirely separate from everything Sterling was about to reach for. The evidence was in the 3rd drawer on the left, waiting for the day Sterling came looking for it. And the timing of the delivery, this date, this address, no earlier, no later, was Graham ensuring that I had what I needed at exactly the moment I would need it most. He had been protecting me. He had been protecting me from beyond the will reading, beyond the mahogany desk, beyond the 7-day vacate notice. Even after he was gone, he was still protecting me. I picked up the phone. I called the police first. Then David Park, my estate attorney, who answered on the 2nd ring and listened without interrupting as I described what was in the hidden panel. Don't move anything, he said immediately. Don't let Sterling touch anything. I'm calling the FBI field office directly. They'll want this chain of custody preserved. He's outside the door, I said. A brief pause. Then unlock it, David said. Let him in. Whatever he says, don't give him anything. The police will be there in minutes. I stood up. I put the deed in my cardigan pocket alongside Graham's note. I unlocked the door. Sterling rushed in the way people rush in when they've been waiting outside a locked door for 10 minutes and have arrived at the conclusion that patience is no longer a strategy. He stopped when he saw the ledgers on the desk. He saw the open drawer, the displaced false bottom, the manila folder with the bank records spread across the desktop. He went completely still. I have seen many things in my 63 years. I have seen the face of someone receiving bad news and someone receiving good news and someone who has just lost something they thought was safe. What I saw on Sterling's face in that moment was different from all of those. It was the specific, particular expression of someone who has been found out, not caught in the act, but found out, retroactively. The discovery not of something being done, but of something already done, already documented, already given to the people who needed it. Those are confidential, firm documents, he said. His voice was very careful, very deliberate. The voice of a man who is aware that he needs to think clearly and is finding it difficult. Covered by attorney-client privilege. Hand them over and we can handle this privately. You mean the documents showing you stole from my husband for 9 years? I said. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Graham knew everything, I said. That's why I got nothing in the will. Because you can't seize what was never mine. You can't freeze a cottage that was transferred to my name 13 months ago. You can't touch evidence that was locked in a drawer, documented and preserved, waiting for exactly this moment. Sterling looked at the ledgers. He looked at me. Something moved through his face that was the collapse of a story he'd been telling himself. The story in which he was in control of what happened after Graham died, in which the widow with the moving boxes was not a person to reckon with, in which the evidence in the drawer did not exist or could be recovered before it mattered. You stupid woman, he said. His voice had gone somewhere cold and stripped of every professional veneer. Graham isn't here to protect you anymore. You have no idea what resources I have, what I can make happen to to you legally. You are alone and you are 63 years old and you have a cottage. The siren was faint first, then closer, then in the driveway. The color left his face in a single, complete motion, like a hand wiping a surface clean. 2 officers came through the front door that I had left unlocked. A third vehicle arrived 2 minutes later. 2 men in plain clothes, one of whom showed credentials that read Special Agent, which I had expected because David had called ahead. Special Agent Thomas Reeves, 19 years with the FBI Financial Crimes Division, came into the study and looked at the ledgers on the desk and looked at the bank records and looked at Sterling with an expression that told me this was not the first time he had stood in a room with a man who had just watched his options disappear. "Mr. Sterling," Agent Reeves said, "I think you know who we are." Sterling turned to me one last time before the officers reached him. "You'll regret this," he said. I looked at the cottage deed in my hand, still warm from Graham's hiding place, the county recording stamp, my name in clean block letters. "He's been protecting me this whole time," I said, "and even dead, he's still winning." The federal case against Sterling took 14 months to move through the system. I want to tell you the broad shape of it rather than every detail, because the details belong to the proceedings and not to me, and because what matters for this story is the outline rather than the accounting. Sterling had been misappropriating funds from Ellison Hospitality's accounts for 9 years, beginning with what Graham's ledgers documented as an initial test, a fabricated expense of $4,200 that Graham had noted and flagged and traced back to its origin within 6 weeks. Graham had not confronted Sterling immediately. Graham, being Graham, had started a second ledger. For 9 years, he documented amounts, dates, shell entities, transfer routes. By the time he contacted the FBI, 18 months before his death, long before the quiet evenings in the study that I had noticed but not fully understood, he had a forensic accounting record that David Park later described to me as one of the cleanest, self-documented fraud cases I've ever seen. The will, deliberately written to exclude me, had been the final move in a protection plan that Graham had been building for 2 years. An estate that contained nothing could not be frozen pending investigation. An asset transferred to my name a year before his death was not an estate asset. A widow with a small cottage and no stake in the proceedings was not a party the federal case needed to detain, depose, or inconvenience. He had removed me from harm with the same deliberate precision he'd used to build 14 hotels. Sterling was charged with wire fraud, securities fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and 3 counts of money laundering. His law license was suspended pending the outcome of the criminal proceedings. He was convicted on all counts 14 months after the study. He was sentenced to 9 years. David Park filed a civil recovery action on behalf of Graham's estate, which, once the federal hold was lifted and Sterling's misappropriated funds were traced and recovered, turned out to contain considerably more than the will had reflected. The charitable donations Graham had specified were honored, the distributions to relatives and friends were made, and the estate's residual assets, after all proceedings concluded, were substantial enough that the distant relatives and old friends who had received their bequests sent me letters of condolence that had a slightly different quality than letters of condolence usually have. Letters written by people who understood, belatedly, that the woman who'd received nothing in the will had understood something they hadn't.